Amelia Carter stepped off the shimmering platform of the Galactic transport pod, her heart thudding with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Before her stretched the vast, crystalline campus of the Galactic University of Advanced Sciences, a place that few humans had ever seen, let alone attended. It was said that the very ground beneath the university pulsed with the collective knowledge of thousands of species from across the cosmos. Transparent walkways floated mid-air, spiraling into towers that seemed to pierce the fabric of the sky, while students of every imaginable shape and form bustled about, their voices a cacophony of alien languages blending into an otherworldly melody. Amelia adjusted the strap of her well-worn satchel, its weight familiar and comforting against her shoulder. Inside lay her tools, simple implements like a screwdriver, a soldering iron, a spool of copper wire, and a small collection of Earth-made spare parts. Back home, these were her lifeline, the tools of her trade, the very essence of her problem-solving ingenuity. But here, as her eyes darted to the sleek, gleaming instruments carried by her alien peers, a seed of doubt began to sprout. Their devices seemed to defy logic, hovering mid-air or folding into themselves like origami before transforming into something entirely new. She couldn't even begin to fathom how they worked. As Amelia made her way toward the orientation hall, she caught snippets of conversation. Is that a human? A tall, silver-skinned alien murmured, his bioluminescent tattoos pulsing in rhythm with his words. I didn't think they let primitives into the university, his companion replied, her voice carrying a hint of disdain. Amelia pretended not to hear, focusing instead on the holographic map projected in front of her by a floating orb station near the entrance. Primitives. The word stung more than she cared to admit, but she shook it off. She wasn't here to prove them wrong, or so she told herself. She was here to learn, to grow, to test the limits of her capabilities. The orientation hall was a marvel of engineering and architecture. Its walls were a shimmering cascade of liquid metal, constantly shifting to display important information, artistic representations of scientific achievements, and live feeds of experiments happening in real time across the galaxy. Amelia found a seat near the back, trying to blend in among the crowd. As the dean of the university, a towering, multi-limbed being whose voice seemed to echo directly in the minds of the attendees, welcomed the incoming class, Amelia felt a surge of pride. She had earned her place here, no matter what anyone said. But that pride was soon tempered by a demonstration meant to showcase the university's cutting-edge facilities. Here at the Galactic University, the dean intoned, we strive to push the boundaries of what is possible. Every student here has access to the finest tools and resources the galaxy has to offer. A series of assistants entered the room, each carrying a glowing device. They distributed them to the students, explaining that these were state-of-the-art learning assistants capable of interfacing directly with their neural pathways, providing real-time solutions, and even simulating complex scenarios. Amelia stared at the sleek device in her hands. It was beautiful, no doubt, but it felt alien both literally and metaphorically. As the orientation ended, students began clustering into groups, their conversations filled with excitement and curiosity. Amelia, on the other hand, found herself alone, her human appearance making her stand out like a sore thumb. She approached a group of her peers cautiously, hoping to introduce herself, but their conversation stopped the moment they noticed her. Can we help you? One of them asked, his tone polite but cold. I'm Amelia, she said, offering a small smile. I just wanted to say hi. It's my first day here, and… Let me guess, interrupted another, a reptilian alien whose scales glimmered like polished emeralds. You're from Earth? I hear they still use combustion engines there. How quaint. The group laughed, a sound that made Amelia's cheeks flush with embarrassment. Look, I'm just here to learn, she said, her voice firm despite the knot tightening in her stomach. Same as you. Of course, the reptilian replied, his grin revealing rows of sharp teeth. Good luck with that. Amelia turned on her heel and walked away, her grip on her satchel tightening. She wasn't about to let their condescension get to her, not yet, at least. She found solace in the university's library, a sprawling space filled with towering shelves of physical and digital texts, some of which seemed to float in midair. She immersed herself in the data, absorbing as much as she could about the university's curriculum, its resources, and the technological marvels her peers seemed to take for granted. As the days turned into weeks, Amelia's resolve was tested time and again. In the classroom, professors would occasionally pause their lectures to explain concepts they assumed a primitive human wouldn't understand. During group projects, her ideas were often dismissed outright, her suggestions deemed too basic. Even outside of academic settings, the whispers and side glances followed her like a shadow. One evening, as she worked late in one of the university's communal labs, an incident solidified her determination. She was repairing a malfunctioning circuit board for an assignment, using her trusty soldering iron and a magnifying glass. A group of alien students entered the lab, their conversation loud and boisterous. "Is that what I think it is?" one of them said, pointing to her soldering iron. "Unbelievable," another chimed in. "I didn't know museums let you borrow artifacts." Amelia looked up, her patience wearing thin. "This artifact is about to fix something your fancy gadgets couldn't," she snapped. The group laughed, but one of them, a sharp-eyed alien with crystalline skin, leaned in closer. "Why not just use a nano repair drone? Or a molecular reassembler? Surely your people have those." "Oh, wait." Amelia set her tools down and stood up, her gaze unwavering. "I may not have your drones or reassemblers," she said, her voice steady. "But I have something just as powerful, ingenuity. And I'll prove it, whether you believe me or not." The aliens exchanged skeptical glances but said nothing further, leaving the lab with amused smirks. Amelia returned to her work, her hands steady despite the frustration bubbling inside her. That night, as she lay in her dormitory staring at the alien constellations visible through her window, Amelia made a promise to herself. She wouldn't just survive here, she would thrive. She would show them that her tools, her methods, and her mind were more than enough to meet the challenges of the Galactic University. What she didn't yet realize was that her moment to prove herself was just around the corner. Amelia's second month at the Galactic University of Advanced Sciences began much like the first, with whispered remarks from her peers, condescending glances during lectures, and the occasional outright dismissal of her contributions. Yet, she soldiered on, determined to make the most of her time there. Her days were a relentless cycle of lectures, labs, and self-study. While the aliens relied heavily on their advanced tools, Amelia preferred the hands-on approach, tinkering with circuits, experimenting with mechanics, and sketching out designs in her well-worn notebook. It was during a particularly monotonous lecture on quantum resonance stabilization that an unexpected opportunity arose. The professor, a towering, insectoid alien with a shimmering carapace, clacked his mandibles together as he spoke. "As you know, the university prides itself on providing real-world challenges. Your next assignment will test not only your understanding of theory but also your ability to apply it. You will be tasked with repairing an ancient quantum core engine." A murmur spread through the lecture hall. The quantum core engine was a fabled piece of technology, older than most civilizations in the galaxy. It powered the university's most revered artifact, a time-weathered relic housed in the campus museum. The engine, however, had been dormant for centuries. Countless attempts to restore it had failed, and it had become something of a ceremonial object, more admired than understood. Each group, the professor continued, will be given access to the engine for a single day. You are expected to document your process and submit a detailed report. The group that makes the most progress will earn a commendation from the Galactic Council itself. The stakes were high, and the tension in the room was palpable. Amelia, seated in the back, felt a flicker of excitement. This was her chance. But as the professor began assigning groups, her hopes dimmed. She was paired with three of the most dismissive students in the class. There was Threll, the reptilian alien who had mocked her on the first day, Kaiva, a crystalline being whose condescending attitude was as sharp as her appearance in Zorith, a floating orb of energy that communicated through pulses of light and sound. They were brilliant, no doubt, but they had made their disdain for Amelia abundantly clear. As the group gathered to discuss their plan, the atmosphere was icy. Threll immediately took charge. "Here's how this will work," he said, his forked tongue flicking out between words. "Kaiva and I will handle the diagnostics. Zorith will analyze the quantum resonance fields. And you," he glanced at Amelia with a smirk, "can take notes." Amelia bit back her frustration. "I think I can do more than just take notes," she said, her voice firm. "I have experience with repair work. Repair work?" Kaiva interrupted, her crystalline surface catching the light in a way that made her seem even more imperious. "Let me guess. You fixed a toaster or two back on Earth?" The group laughed, and Amelia's cheeks burned. She clenched her fists, determined not to let their ridicule get to her. "Fine," she said. "You do it your way. But when it doesn't work, don't say I didn't warn you." The next day, they were escorted to the museum's restricted section, where the quantum core engine was housed. The relic was a marvel of design, a sphere of interlocking plates that seemed to shimmer with an internal glow, despite being inactive. Intricate patterns were etched across its surface, symbols from a long-forgotten language. Threll and Kaiva immediately set to work, using their advanced tools to scan the engine. Zorith floated nearby, emitting pulses of light as it analyzed the resonance fields. Amelia stood back, observing their efforts. Hours passed, and frustration began to mount. Despite their sophisticated equipment, the group made little progress. Threll's scanner emitted a series of frustrated beeps, and he slammed it onto the table. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered. "The engine's quantum resonance is completely out of sync. It's like trying to tune 1,000 instruments to the same frequency, but every time you adjust one, the others fall out of tune." Kaiva nodded, her crystalline form dimming slightly. "The energy flow is too chaotic. Even if we stabilize one section, the rest collapses. This technology is infuriatingly primitive." "Maybe that's the problem," Amelia said, stepping forward. The others turned to her, their expressions skeptical. "This engine was built long before your tools and scanners existed," she continued. "You're trying to understand it using technology that's fundamentally different from what it was designed for. Maybe you need to think more. Analog." "Analog?" Threll snorted. "That's your solution? Use caveman methods to fix an ancient relic?" "Do you have a better idea?" Amelia shot back. "Because it seems to me like your fancy tools aren't getting the job done." There was a tense silence before Kaiva sighed. "Fine. What do you suggest?" Amelia hesitated for a moment, then pulled out her notebook. She had spent the previous night studying the limited data available on the quantum core engine, sketching out theories and possible solutions. "We need to bypass the chaotic energy flow altogether," she explained, pointing to her diagrams. "If we isolate the core's central processing unit and manually stabilize it, we can create a feedback loop that will bring the outer systems into alignment." The others exchanged doubtful glances but eventually agreed to let her try. Amelia approached the engine, her tools in hand. She began by carefully dismantling one of the outer plates, her movements precise and deliberate. The internal mechanisms were a maze of circuits and conduits, each more intricate than the last. "Be careful," Kaiva warned. "One wrong move and you could destabilize the entire structure." "I know," Amelia replied, her focus unwavering. Hours turned into an intense blur as Amelia worked, her hands moving with practiced ease. She used her soldering iron to repair a damaged circuit, her screwdriver to adjust a misaligned component, and her copper wire to create a makeshift connection. All the while, she explained her process to the group, who watched in a mix of skepticism and reluctant admiration. Finally, Amelia connected the last wire and stepped back. The engine emitted a low hum, and the patterns on its surface began to glow faintly. The chaotic energy flows that had plagued the device were now stable, forming a synchronized rhythm. "It's not fully operational," Amelia admitted, wiping sweat from her brow. "But it's a start." The group stared at the engine in stunned silence. Threll was the first to speak. "I can't believe it," he muttered. "It actually worked." "Not bad for a caveman," Kaiva added, a faint smile crossing her crystalline face. Even Zorith emitted a series of bright pulses, which Amelia interpreted as approval. As they left the museum that evening, Amelia felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in weeks. For the first time, she had shown her peers that her methods, however primitive they might seem, were just as valid, if not more so, than their advanced technology. What she didn't realize was that this success was only the beginning of her journey. The challenges ahead would test her ingenuity and resolve in ways she could never have imagined. Amelia arrived at the lab early the next morning, the events of the previous day still fresh in her mind. The faint glow of the partially restored quantum core engine had been a small victory, but it was just the beginning. The artifact, now delicately encased in a protective stasis field, still held its secrets tightly. While she had managed to stabilize its chaotic energy flows, bringing it back to full functionality would require more than a quick fix. The task ahead loomed like a mountain, and Amelia knew she couldn't climb it alone. The rest of her group arrived shortly after. Threll entered first, his reptilian features betraying a mix of annoyance and reluctant respect. Kaiva followed, her crystalline body catching the morning light, casting prismatic shadows on the lab walls. Zorith hovered in silently, its energy pulsating faintly, a language Amelia was slowly starting to understand as subtle shifts in tone and intensity. "Well," Threll began, crossing his arms, "you managed to stabilize it yesterday. Impressive for a human. But don't think this means you've solved it. There's still a lot we don't understand about this thing." Amelia shot him a look but chose to focus on the task at hand instead of his backhanded compliment. "We stabilized the core, but the feedback loop isn't strong enough to sustain the engine's full functionality. It's like patching a leaky dam. It'll hold for now, but we need a permanent solution." Kaiva approached the engine, her crystalline fingers hovering over its surface without touching it. "The internal harmonics are still misaligned," she observed. "Even if we fix the feedback loop, the processing unit won't activate unless the resonance patterns are perfectly synchronized. It's like trying to balance on a three-legged stool." Amelia nodded. "Exactly. But I've been thinking about how we might solve that." She opened her notebook, flipping to a page filled with detailed diagrams and annotations. "If we can manually tune the harmonics using a phased input generator." "A phased input generator?" Threll interrupted, his scaly brow furrowing. "Do you even know how complex those are to calibrate? It's not like you can just slap one together with your primitive tools." Amelia's patience was wearing thin. "Actually, I think I can," she said, her voice steady but firm. "It won't be elegant, but it'll work. I just need a few components from the supply depot." Kaiva raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Amelia replied. "Do you want to spend weeks trying to decipher this thing's internal code, or do you want to get results today?" There was a tense silence before Kaiva sighed. "Fine. Let's see what you've got." With that, Amelia set to work. The supply depot was a labyrinth of shelves filled with parts and materials from across the galaxy. To most, it was an overwhelming mess, but to Amelia, it was a treasure trove. She moved through the aisles with purpose, collecting the items she needed: a handful of conductive filaments, a small power cell, and a device she recognized as a phase modulator, albeit in a form she'd never seen before. Back in the lab, Amelia spread the components across the workbench and began assembling the phased input generator. Threll and Kaiva watched skeptically, while Zorith hovered nearby, emitting faint pulses of light that Amelia interpreted as curiosity. "This isn't going to work," Threll muttered, leaning against the wall. "You can't just cobble together a phased input generator like it's a children's toy." "Watch me," Amelia shot back, not looking up from her work. Her hands moved with precision, soldering connections and aligning components with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years tinkering with machines. It wasn't long before the device began to take shape, a rough, almost crude version of what her alien peers might consider acceptable, but functional nonetheless. Finally, after hours of painstaking effort, Amelia held up the completed generator. "It's not pretty," she admitted, "but it'll do the job." Threll scoffed. "We'll see about that." The group approached the quantum core engine, which still emitted a faint hum from the previous day's repairs. Amelia connected the phased input generator to the engine's central processing unit, carefully aligning the components to ensure a stable connection. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "Here goes nothing." She activated the generator. At first, nothing happened. The lab was silent, except for the low hum of the engine. Then, slowly, the patterns etched into its surface began to glow brighter. The hum grew louder, more rhythmic, as the harmonics shifted and aligned. "It's working," Kaiva whispered, her crystalline body shimmering with excitement. But just as the group began to celebrate, the engine emitted a sharp, discordant screech. Sparks flew from the connection points, and the glow of the patterns flickered erratically. "Shut it down," Threll shouted, his voice panicked. Amelia quickly disconnected the generator, and the engine fell silent. The group stared at it, their excitement replaced by frustration. "What happened?" Kaiva asked, her voice tinged with disappointment. Amelia frowned, examining the generator. The harmonics were aligning, but the feedback loop couldn't handle the increased energy flow. "We're close, but we need to reinforce the stabilization matrix." "Reinforce it how?" Threll demanded. "This thing is already on the verge of falling apart." Amelia thought for a moment, then looked at Zorith. "You can manipulate energy fields, right?" Zorith pulsed in response, a series of bright, quick flashes that Amelia interpreted as agreement. "Then you can help us stabilize the feedback loop," she said. "Your energy manipulation could act as a temporary buffer while we fine-tune the harmonics." Zorith pulsed again, this time more deliberately. Amelia took it as a yes. The group worked late into the night, each member contributing their expertise. Threll and Kaiva used their advanced tools to map the energy flows in real time, while Zorith focused its energy manipulation on stabilizing the core. Amelia, meanwhile, adjusted the phased input generator, refining its output to better match the engine's needs. Finally, after hours of painstaking effort, the engine roared to life. The patterns on its surface glowed with a brilliant, steady light, and the hum of its harmonics was perfectly synchronized. "We did it," Kaiva said, her voice filled with awe. Threll nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, we did." Amelia allowed herself a small smile. For the first time since arriving at the university, she felt like she truly belonged. Together they had accomplished what had seemed impossible, and she knew this was just the beginning of what they could achieve. As the group stood in the glow of the restored quantum core engine, Amelia felt a surge of pride. She had proven that her methods, however unconventional, were just as valid as the advanced tools her peers relied on, and in doing so, she had earned their respect. But deep down, she knew that this success would only bring more challenges. The universe was vast and filled with mysteries, and Amelia was ready to face them head-on. The restoration of the quantum core engine became the talk of the Galactic University. Within hours, news spread across the campus that a group of students had achieved what countless experts and scholars had deemed impossible. Amelia found herself at the center of attention, her peers suddenly eager to approach her, to ask questions, to learn more about her methods. Yet, as thrilling as the recognition was, she couldn't shake the feeling that their success was only the beginning of something far larger. 2 days after the engine was fully operational, the group was summoned to a high-security conference room deep within the university's administrative tower. The message was cryptic, but the urgency was clear. Amelia and her team arrived to find a gathering of senior professors, including the dean, along with several members of the Galactic Council. Their expressions were grave. "Please sit," the dean said, gesturing to a long table in the center of the room. His multi-limbed form loomed over them, his mandibles clicking softly in thought. Once everyone was seated, he continued, "You've accomplished something extraordinary. The restoration of the quantum core engine is a breakthrough that will undoubtedly reshape our understanding of ancient technologies. However, there's a matter of significant concern." Amelia glanced at her teammates, who looked just as confused as she felt. "Concern?" she asked hesitantly. "What do you mean?" The dean's compound eyes fixed on her. "The engine you restored it is not merely a relic. It is, in fact, a key component of an ancient planetary defense system, one that was decommissioned thousands of years ago. The energy it generates is designed to interface with a network of dormant satellites that, if activated, could unleash catastrophic destruction." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over the group like a storm cloud. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. "So, by restoring the engine, we might have accidentally reactivated the system?" she asked. "Not entirely," one of the council members interjected. The alien's voice was smooth and measured, but his tone carried an edge of urgency. "The system remains inactive for now, but the engine has sent out a signal we believe has been intercepted by hostile forces. If these forces gain access to the system, they could weaponize it." Amelia's mind raced. The restoration, which had felt like such a triumph, now seemed fraught with unintended consequences. "What can we do?" she asked. "That is why we called you here," the dean said. "You and your team are the only ones who fully understand how the engine operates. We need you to disable it before it falls into the wrong hands." Thrall leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "Disable it? Are you serious? Do you know how long it took us to get that thing working?" "We understand the gravity of this request," the council member replied. "But time is of the essence. Hostile forces are already en route to this location. If they arrive before the engine is deactivated, the consequences could be catastrophic." Amelia took a deep breath, the enormity of the situation sinking in. "We'll do it," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We'll disable the engine." The group was escorted back to the lab, now under heavy security. Amelia and her teammates wasted no time diving back into the intricate workings of the quantum core engine, but disabling it proved to be even more complex than restoring it. The engine systems were designed with failsafes that resisted shutdown, as though it were programmed to protect itself at all costs. As the hours ticked by, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Amelia could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of the task pressing down on her. Her hands moved with steady precision, but her mind was racing. Every adjustment, every recalibration brought them closer to success or failure. At one point, Kaiva let out a frustrated sigh, her crystalline surface dimming. "This isn't working," she said. "The harmonics keep resetting themselves. It's like the engine is actively fighting us." "Maybe it is," Thrall muttered, his reptilian features drawn in frustration. "This thing was built to be indestructible. How are we supposed to shut it down?" Amelia stepped back, staring at the engine, as if seeing it for the first time. "Indestructible doesn't mean infallible," she said. "Every system has a weakness. We just have to find it." She thought back to her initial research, to the diagrams and annotations she had pored over in the library. Then it hit her. "The central processing unit," she said, her voice rising with urgency. "It's the engine's brain, right? If we can isolate it and overload its circuits, it might trigger a failsafe shutdown. Kaiva frowned. But that could cause a chain reaction. The entire engine might collapse. It's a risk we have to take, Amelia said. If we don't shut it down, this thing could be used as a weapon. Do you want that on your conscience? The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Finally, Kaiva nodded. Let's do it, working together. The group implemented Amelia's plan. Threll and Kaiva used their advanced tools to isolate the central processing unit, while Zorith manipulated energy fields to stabilize the engine during the process. Amelia took charge of overloading the circuits, her hands moving with practiced ease as she connected wires and adjusted settings. As the final connections were made, the engine began to shudder, its hum growing louder and more erratic. The patterns on its surface flickered, their glow intensifying. Amelia stepped back, her heart pounding. Here goes nothing, she said. She activated the overload. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the engine emitted a burst of light that filled the room. The patterns on its surface shattered, and the hum abruptly ceased. When the light faded, the engine was dark and silent. It worked, Kaiva said, her voice filled with awe. But their victory was short-lived. An alarm blared, and a voice over the intercom announced hostile forces have breached the perimeter. All personnel, evacuate immediately. Amelia and her team exchanged panicked glances. We have to get out of here, Threll said. As they raced out of the lab, the ground shook with the impact of distant explosions. Security forces engaged the intruders, buying the group precious time to escape. They reached the evacuation point just as a transport pod arrived, its doors sliding open. Amelia paused before boarding, her gaze lingering on the lab they were leaving behind. The engine was disabled, its threat neutralized for now. But the experience had changed her. She had come to the Galactic University to prove herself, to show that her primitive methods were just as valid as the advanced tools her peers relied on. And she had done that. But she had also learned something far more important: the power of collaboration, of combining strengths to overcome even the greatest challenges. As the transport pod lifted off, carrying them to safety, Amelia looked at her teammates. Threll, Kaiva, and Zorith had started as skeptics, even adversaries. But together, they had achieved the impossible. And in doing so, they had forged a bond that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The universe was vast, filled with mysteries and dangers. But Amelia knew she was ready to face them because now she wasn't facing them alone.